Welcome to yet another episode of CFS Conversations. And this time, we are delighted to have with us the Global Director, I must add, of Agriculture and Food at the World Bank, Mr. Martien van Nieuwkoop. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just before we started, we were having a bit of banter around a number of things, including CFS, because you are here on the occasion of the 50th edition of the Committee on World Food Security's plenary.
Yes.
Right? And a lot of things are happening, and it's coming against a backdrop of very difficult circumstances globally. Millions of people, actually probably billions of people, going hungry or not being able to access the right type of food. What do you see? How do you assess the situation from where you sit?
Well, I think, we're facing a very serious food crisis, and that crisis actually has been kind of brewing for some time. You see actually that food insecurity has been worsening since 2015. Actually, we saw a downward trend up until 2015, and then actually saw an upward trend in food insecurity since 2015, moving in the wrong direction. That has been kind of accelerated because of COVID-19, and of course another kind of push very much in the wrong direction because of the war in Ukraine. So now we're in 2022. The SDGs were adopted in 2015, where actually we saw the trend reversing. We're kind of now halfway between 2015 and 2030. So actually it's going to be very, very difficult to achieve, the SDGs when it comes to achieving zero hunger in the world. At the same time also what you see is that, kind of looking forward now, climate change seems to be unfolding kind of much more rapidly than most of the projections have indicated. And clearly unfolding much more rapidly than the world is building resilience. So as a result, you seem to have crisis after crisis, and therefore emergency after emergency that is actually pushing the food security numbers and the nutrition security numbers in the wrong direction. So I think we had a very critical junction that we need to think through. Besides putting in place, short-term emergency response measures, but also think actually how do we actually deal with those longer-term challenges, and how do we address those drivers? We cannot lose sight of that, I think, as well.
Mm. It's a bleak situation, to be really honest. There's no other way of putting it. But the other part of the discussion that we're transitioning into is, and this is, you must be involved in tons of these or driving those conversations yourself, of what do we do then? It might sound daunting, and it is, but the beauty of human beings is that we have always surmounted even the most challenging of situations. So what are some of those solutions that at the bank you are starting to put in place, or you're hearing partners talking about and people are starting to coalesce around?
Yes, at the bank, in view of those overlapping crises, so you have a food security, food crisis, there's a fuel crisis, there's issues with fertilizer availability, issues with depth. So the bank has put in place a very comprehensive kind of response package that was presented to our board early July, in which the bank actually committed itself to make $170 billion available between June this year and June next year, our fiscal year. And as part of that, there is a dedicated window, to address, the rising food and nutrition insecurity. Of course, there are no silver bullets and there are no kind of blueprints. So the solutions need to be determined and implemented at the country level. So for that reason, when it comes to the response package, we're offering a menu in the bank's overall global response when it comes to food and nutrition security. So, and that covers, the various dimensions of food security. So it's on the demand side, the affordability side, where we will be scaling up, social safety nets in a kind of a nutrition sensitive fashion. on the availability side, supporting farmers to get ready for the next planting season, kind of short-term measures there. Then on the stability dimension of food security, making sure that countries actually avoid putting in place adverse trade policies, because we know the very bad effect of export restrictions, what that does to kind of commodity prices and domestic food price inflation from the food price crisis in 2007, 2008. So that needs to be avoided. So a very clear advocacy function there. And then very importantly, and it's very interesting that most of our clients and shareholders are actually indicating that, look, when it comes to this, dealing with this crisis, we need to think beyond the short-term emergency measures. We need to make sure that the short-term emergency measures support the longer-term building resilience efforts as well. And that's very much kind of, embedded and incorporated in the package that the bank is putting on the table. Now, clearly, also, this package is recognizing that the current crisis actually also opens the door for opportunities. When you think, for instance, the fertilizer shortage and the high fertilizer prices, that clearly offers opportunities to think about fertilizer use efficiency, alternatives to synthetic fertilizers, which of course is needed, from the longer term perspective when it comes to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement to lower the carbon footprint of the sector, because the use of fertilizers is a major part of the contributions that the sector actually makes to greenhouse gas emissions. Another opportunity that we see is that when countries facing this overlapping crisis, including food security, compared to the food price crisis in 2007, 2008, coming out of COVID, the fiscal constraints, the countries are not very well positioned most countries are not very well positioned to respond because of their tight, fiscal constraints, as well as, high debt levels. And of course, that should generate an interest by ministers of finance to look to what extent existing subsidies, existing public support programs to agriculture can actually be better used and actually provide a bigger bang for the buck. And of course, I think there are many opportunities there that we try to bring to bear in our policy dialogue. Yes.
Quite a lot of really interesting strategies and actions that you have outlined, Martin. And I go back to what you said, because I liked it. You said we have a menu of solutions, but the solutions are going to be country-led, exactly. Right? And at CFS, we pride ourselves in being that platform that brings together all kinds of partners, starting with members and the World Bank and the UN agencies, private sector, civil society, and find a way of working in support of countries. What role do you see CFS playing in supporting partners like yourselves address this crisis, or more importantly, you support countries?
Yes, I think this is a very good question. When we worked and in the lead up to the UN Food System Summit last year, and the bank was very much involved in the finance lever of the UN Food System Summit. With a clear focus on, what is needed for a food systems transformation in support of healthy people, planet, and economy. A lot of discussion about the hidden cost of the food system, but then also what type and what scale of investments are needed actually to get a food system that supports healthy people, planet, and economy. And the different calculations out there, but I think the commonality is that those numbers are huge. No, a study that the bank has been associated with and was done by the Food and Land Use Coalition indicates that we need annual investments of between $300 and $400 billion per year actually to get a food system that's green, resilient, and inclusive. And clearly, the World Bank, has a portfolio that I oversee for agriculture and food of about $25 billion. As global director for agriculture and food, I would love to have a a portfolio that's twice as big, but still that would not be sufficient. So the clear message is that not a single institution can do this alone, and for that reason collaboration and partnerships are very important. And I think this is where the CFS comes in. Now it provides actually a very good platform actually to foster those type of partnerships and make sure that everybody's on the same page when it comes to pursuing, their financing and their activities, that they put on the table in support of food system transformation at the country level. So that I would see that as a very important critical condition, because without partnership, we will not be able to see that type of change that is needed.
What are we doing that we should continue doing more of, and what should we not do?
Well, I think CFS should continue, to provide this platform for partnership. What I said, I think that's very critical, because not a single institution can do it alone. What I'm wondering, I'm not so sure whether it is doing less. Maybe it's actually what CFS should do more. And in the sense that I would like to see the CFS, play a very important role to kind of address the very significant fragmentation that we see in ODA to agriculture. About 2/3 is bilateral. The medium amount of each activity that counts towards ODA in agriculture is $500,000. So being that platform for collaboration, this is good, but to what extent can you also use that platform, to address that fragmentation? Because it's very difficult to see that with this fragmented approach, to ODA in agriculture, that we can be successful and effective for systems change, which actually is calling for more comprehensive and holistic approaches. Also, in terms of the policy advice and the guidelines, I also don't think it's a question of doing less. I think I would call for the CFS to do more. You have those voluntary guidelines, and as I said before, I don't like that they're voluntary. I think they should actually be mandatory. And what can CFS do? That you move in that direction, that they become, rather than a voluntary guideline, a critical benchmark against which performance is actually evaluated, including by the financial markets when it comes to private companies.
Fantastic. There you have it. At a time when the world is facing a cocktail of challenges, the world has a menu of solutions. Thank you very much, Martin, for being with us.
Most welcome. Thank you.